Hello there, this is a video to share some very disturbing and alarming evidence that has recently come to light in connection with the suicide of Anita Fevang's father some 30 years ago. And this evidence raises the distinct possibility that there was foul play at work during this event, and we have not been therefore told the whole story. Now, I have no wish to detract at all from the tragedy surrounding this event or the sad circumstances in which this occurred, but I do feel a strong obligation to share this information regarding the very disturbing nature of the evidence that has come to my attention over the past few weeks and months. So, this, of course, is in relation to Anita Fevang, the person whose father took his own life, and the same person who has incidentally subjected me to a very determined and extreme campaign of intensive terrorism for the past 17 years, since 2003, which of course naturally makes me very suspicious about what happened to her father, and the fact that he could have also been subjected to a very similar pattern of abuse, terrorism and intimidation as I have been, which I think would very easily have encouraged him to take his own life and finish his existence prematurely. So this I have endeavoured, or this pattern of abuse that I've just described, that I have suffered at the hands of Anita Fevang and her friends and family, I've endeavoured to, show on this timeline of my life here. This is with the three lines, the red line showing my cancer experience when it started and its 25-year duration. The campaign of terror here that started by Anita Fevang and her boyfriend Dan Marshall in 2003. And the yellow line, which indicates the escalation of the terror campaign against me to include intensive suicide incitement. That's not just of myself, rather, but of my son as well, Benjamin Fevang. Now, this is the early, the accidents I had in the early part of my life, so I don't want to go into now. As I say, this red line here indicates the beginning of my cancer experience, sinus cancer, that started in 1995 when I was 28 years old. So the strong suggestion here, or the immediate problem here, or issue, is that I was a cancer patient that had been battling cancer for about 8 years by 2003, and had picked up also quite a serious head injury from a car accident some years earlier. This is when I was 14. So I don't believe I should have become the victim of such a sophisticated and determined campaign of terror organised by perfectly healthy thugs for the best part of 17 years. And this includes the escalation of this campaign of terror in 2014 to include the isolation of my son and using him as a pawn to just force me to take my own life, presumably to destroy the evidence that I have discovered. So, yes, that's all very revealing, I believe, of Anita Fevang's mindset and the strategies that she employs. And perhaps I should also indicate, the fact, at this stage that such a sophisticated campaign of terror like this that started in 2003 upon a vulnerable person such as myself, who was struggling with cancer at the time, is a very strong indication that Anita Fevang was honing and practicing these skills from a very young age, and that she very likely practiced these strategies of manipulation upon her father during her childhood, and that might explain how she became a seasoned pro, how by her early 20s, she was literally highly skilled at the task of intensive terrorism and manipulation and intimidation. Now, to suggest to you that yes, adults don't suddenly just wake up one day as highly skilled, seasoned professionals at this job. It does take a number of years of practice to hone these skills, which I can assure you Anita Fevang is extremely good at. Now, very briefly, this attack in 2003 against me took place, which was interestingly the precursor to 17 years of terrorism against me and a number of other physical assaults. As I say, happened in 2003 and performed by this brick murder attempt was performed by this new boyfriend at the time of Anita Fevang called Dan Marshall, who I have endeavored to recreate an image of. This is using a picture I found on Google. This is Dan Marshall, the man himself. All I had to do is Photoshop a brick into his hand, and this surprisingly recreated an exact reconstruction or a deadly accurate image of the person I had to face some 17 years ago. So that was quite useful in that respect to help other people understand what I went through, what I had to face. This is the address where I went to see my son in 2003. Went to knock on the front door here. Dan Marshall came running down the staircase here, picked up a brick by the drain cover, and wasted no time in making repeated lunges at my head with it in response to my request just to see my son for a few minutes, who was only 3 years old at the time. Which is absolutely outrageous. I'm just a chap struggling with cancer and a head injury who's gone to see my 3-year-old son, the only person I had in my life practically at the time, only to be met by this mad monkey murdering lunatic, trying to split my head open with a brick. Yeah, so that was there's another picture of him here actually, which is, I think, very revealing of his true character and true colours. This is a picture I lifted from his Facebook page, oddly enough, and yes, he was then given the nickname after this attack upon me, Dan Brick Murder Marshall, which I think is very apt, given his very determined tries at splitting people's heads open, or efforts rather, yes, at splitting people's heads open. Now, the pattern of abuse that I suffered has been extreme, and I think it deserves just a closer look briefly, with a view to understanding a little bit better how Anita Fevang operates and how she uses terror to cover up terror and abuse to cover up abuse. And I believe this is another consequence of her upbringing, very sadly. She only seems to understand how to terrorize people and how to, the suggestion is here, yes, she kicked off this terror campaign in 2003. She has been constantly cajoling and including other perfectly healthy thugs into her little campaign along the way, and we see here this escalation, this yellow line here depicting an escalation in this campaign of intimidation against me, which as I suggest, was completely illegal in the first place, had never been started, but does indicate that she is using terror to cover up terror, crime to cover up crime, abuse to cover up abuse, merely for the fact that she does not know how to do anything else. She is a highly skilled professional when it comes to these tactics, and her only response to being caught committing these crimes is to cover them up with more of what she knows how to do, which is more of the same. More crime, more abuse, more terror. Which, as I say, is shown very clearly by this yellow line here. And this has all come to a head recently, with various other developments that have made it only all the more clear, what she's up to. Now, just to say, look a little bit more closely at what this involves and the skills that she picked up as a young girl. I have said here, yes, if the last 6 years of daily terrorism and systematic abuse of myself and my son Benjamin Fevang are anything to... Hello there, I was just rudely cut off there. Yes, if the last 6 years of daily terrorism and systematic abuse of myself and my son Benjamin are anything to go by, it's no surprise at all that Anita Fevang's father took his own life. Now, this is purely from my perspective, of course, but given the intensity and determined full-on nature of this intimidation and terrorism I've been subjected to, and the sustained nature of it, I am in personally no doubt whatsoever that that would force any person to take their own life. I believe I'm quite a strong-charactered person, and quite literally 999 people out of 1,000 would jump off a cliff if they were subjected to this form of abuse. And I suggest, wouldn't you, if you were subjected to a 6-year daily onslaught of extreme isolation, relentless abuse, constant intimidation, silence and manipulation, murder attempts, perjury and lying to police, GBH caused to your children, child abduction, bribery and extortion, severe mutilations caused by all the above. And just winding back briefly here to GBH caused to our children, this harks back to a very sad accident that happened to my son Benjamin. This is in a local park as a result, I believe, of the terror campaign that was being organised against me at the time. And this was in the immediate aftermath of the brick murder attempt and the perjury and lying to police that was used to cover up this brick murder attempt and try and make me look like the offender, and make my son fatherless and stop me from seeing him, basically. So yes, the strong suggestion is here that if we take somebody with a head injury who's struggling with cancer, then we will undoubtedly cause some very serious issues, or increase the likelihood of an accident, quite simply by leaving a vulnerable person outnumbered by perfectly healthy thugs who are relentlessly intimidating someone who's been put in the responsibility of a child. To suggest, yes, there are vulnerable people out there who are single parents. I mean, by definition, they perhaps can't find a partner because they have a terminal illness and they have a disability, so they are on their own, and then suddenly become a victim of organised abuse from third parties, and campaigns, whether it be cancer patient bashing campaigns, I call them, but it does involve large numbers of perfectly healthy thugs and bullies who are more than willing to join in and seem to get this strange satisfaction and entertainment value from intimidating and scaring vulnerable, disadvantaged people. As I say, and now the only result of this, or the only possible outcome, very sadly, is that a child will have a very serious accident. And in my case, my poor son fractured his femur in an accident in the park, which, as I say, I don't think would have been quite so serious if I had not been subjected to quite such a determined campaign of terror at the time. And the only response, with my discovery of all the, of these atrocious crimes has been just to pile more terrorism, or more intimidation at me in the form of, taking my son hostage, bribing him, blackmailing him, extortion, tactics of involving, yes, extortion and God knows what else. Which has only resulted very tragically in some quite severe mutilations caused to myself as a direct consequence of this, very much in the same vein as my son had an accident. So yes, I mean, your child is likely to have an accident if the parent is, or a child is unlikely to have an accident if the vulnerable parent is being subjected to such a sophisticated and determined campaign of terror. And it's also very likely that the parent will come out quite seriously mutilated as well in some years later, which has happened to me. Now, this I have tried to very briefly, I'll show you in these pictures here. This is me in around the year 1999 or sort of 2000, when I met Anita Fevang, here with a cancerous tumour growing in my left sinus cavity that was causing significant problems and a permanent blockage to the side of my head. The effect of this was to exact pressure upon my head like so, resulting in this mild distortion to my features, and also the loss of over half of my teeth, I hasten to add. But the point is here that yes, when somebody's struggling with cancer and we subject them again to a sophisticated, determined campaign of terror, then it's very surprising if somebody's going to come out, really not mutilated or unaffected. And I'm very lucky, I think, to not have been more seriously harmed than I have been, given the gravity of the problems that I was facing. I mean, the cancer and this mad woman, Anita Fevang, who quite honestly, obviously had no empathy for my situation whatsoever. Very quickly, here's the teeth that I lost as a consequence of this. This is over half of my teeth, because sinus cancer exacerbates tooth decay, and so do acts of determined, campaigns of terrorism and intimidation. And this has been the result. I've been unable to eat food or chew food properly now for the best part of 10 years nearly, which is, yes, been another sad consequence and just more evidence of the fact that none of this seems to be, or have had a very satisfactory outcome. Now, this brings me on to the two stories that I was told about Anita Fevang. Anita Fevang told me, rather, regarding not just her father but also this rape ordeal that she often talks about. And at the time, I must admit, I did realise that there was a degree of sort of crocodile tears about it all, and bad acting, insofar as she was constantly looking up during the narration of these stories, as if to check that I was, giving her enough attention and believing all the information, slight suspicious information I was being told. And the suggestion here is that yes, there could be not only a connection between the treatment that I have suffered the past 17 years and that was administered to her father some 30 years ago, but also a connection between the death of her father and this rape ordeal that Anita suffered quite shortly after the death of her father. In other words, to suggest that there may be some kind of a revenge or payback in the rape ordeal, in so far as I think it could be, yes, be some kind of a retaliation is the word I'm looking for the treatment that she gave her father. Now, this was something that struck me, obviously as being a strong possibility once I looked at the real facts and I started to look a little bit more closely at the actual stories themselves. And starting with the first one, this is the death of her father. The sad story of her father's death didn't quite add up. He took his own life holding a shotgun to his chest only 10 minutes before Anita and her mother Tova Twyton came home from school. Now, the story I was told very briefly was that yes, he held a shotgun to his chest, not his mouth, I hasten to add, and this must have happened about 10-20 minutes before Anita and her mother came home from school, because he was upstairs when he did this and blew a hole through his chest with a 12-bore shotgun, leaving literally blood pouring through the kitchen ceiling onto the kitchen table. And it's almost as if he wanted them to see the mess and provide them with an image that will endure in their mind in response to the heartless, horrible treatment he was subjected to for over a decade. And as I say, I am not in any doubt myself that given the same treatment that I was given by Anita Fevang, that this would certainly push any person to take their own life. And I therefore became very strongly suspicious that this 10-20 minute gap was a deliberate effort made by her father to make sure that both Anita and her mother had a good look, not just at his